This is Antithesis, your underground academic radio where the focus is on you. For those that are in the thick of it today, we know what you are living through. And for those that chose or were forced onto a different path, we know what it costs. We're here to be your companion and to help you reorient your compass a bit, to help make sense of it all. Thanks for being here. The opinions expressed here are my own and do not reflect those of my employer or any entity professionally affiliated with me. Topics in these podcasts will be familiar to many, if not all, within the academic and scientific communities, within institutions, industries, and employers of all kinds. Some of these topics may be of a highly sensitive nature to certain listeners, particularly those that have experienced or are experiencing them, and could trigger some emotions that are upsetting or distressing. I've created this space to speak openly about these topics with the broader goal of helping individuals cope, adjust, and adapt constructively to the many challenges at hand. With that said, thank you for joining me. Antithesis, Episode 18, Wellness. Hello everyone, we appreciate you joining us for today's episode. The one thing that we must foster for ourselves, no one else can do it for you, no one, no matter how much they want to do so, is wellness. Your sacrifice of wellness should not be a thing that earns you any or extra favor, and if you are told it does, then therein lies an irreconcilable issue. Folks, I will not allude to any concept that academia hosts any set of circumstances or conditions that will make it special or exceptional in that regard. But I will state for the record, people that have continued to pursue growth in knowledge and philosophy should know better. But to a notable degree, they don't. Just like the rest of the world, turf wars and skirmishes, internal and external, abound. Too often, these higher learnings end up leading to weaponization of internal systems, including lack of real, concrete success metrics and vagueness in preferences and directives for performance and otherwise, and balkanization against change, including enabling steps towards deeper self-assessment and incorporating mechanisms for improvement. And I state this from experience. No place is safe, whether at the top of lists or near the bottom. And even if your intuition tells you that feels like such a fair place, it just isn't wise to ever let your guard down. I have little doubt that many factors fit into why this is the case, and just like the corporate world, if you're not at the top, what's stopping you from acting like you are? And to just see what institutions will advertise and promote to convey what makes them so great, especially if you watch college athletic events like football or basketball, and each school and their respective athletic conferences have minute-long commercial spots touting academic excellence. Looks good from the outside, doesn't it? And yet again, especially for the time being, really no wishes to be granted, even if only to go back in time and hope some folks to work to make the effort to form some different kind of model. But here, only pain brings change, if change can be brought at all. And I think this is really an antithesis that must be discussed. The phrase no pain, no gain is synonymous with sports and even learning. The former for the physical, the latter more for the psychological and sometimes emotional. The dichotomy between the primary, let's just say binary, philosophies couldn't be further apart. Hold them up to make them into something greater, or beat them down and stand right on their backs. Again, these themes permeate anything and everything in our society, whether it's folks doing the day-to-day tasks that keep our world fed, fueled, fixed, and flying, whether the collars are blue or white, whether you are working deep down in the mines and tunnels, right at the ground surface, or thrust high into a skyscraper. What in God's name are we doing to ourselves, and why? I've aimed to keep these episodes under 20 minutes, and just this topic in and of itself hits me personally and deeply. And it hits each and every one of you. And even though for some of you the reflex is strong to say, hey, I'm okay, it is simply an inevitable truth, because so many of us are instilled to absorb and to not reflect, to be seen and not heard, and to suffer people's bullshit so consistently and so deeply that this containment of toxicity and otherwise ends up sapping critical energy and even the slightest desire for self-care. There are indeed times in everyone's life where we just need to eat rocks, no doubt. But it makes me wonder for how many that self-destruction of one's own self-care and wellness ends up becoming a primary driving force in one's life. A sacrifice, a penance that must be paid to get ahead, or maybe to barely break even. A good friend of mine, Josh, you out there, used to joke about how angry I was when we talked about various topics, particularly about opportunities ignored and even lost in certain spaces, including with examples like further advancing renewable energy technologies and opportunities, but merely the recalcitrance of others to even be willing to be a part of a constructive conversation, nay, to even acknowledge the worth of any conversation whatsoever. The seeming lack of desire for progress of any kind from so many folks can be enough for blood pressures to rise, blood vessels to burst, and maybe even heart attacks to be had. but forcing myself to think of it more closely. Josh wasn't wrong. And I know my own privilege. I'm a Caucasian male, but I can barely remember a moment where I didn't feel like I had to put on a metaphorical pair of boxing gloves to make some kind of move, to succeed at something where I felt disadvantaged or even just ignored. And this meant I was fueled by anger so often. And I reiterate, I did not have the disadvantages like so many others. And this is something that too many people need to be clockwork oranged, as I like to say, with their eyelids mechanically locked open. These playing fields are different. We've discussed this and related overarching topics more than once in this series. What is the line between passion for something and straight on anger? And we all have those moments where focusing anger just right can almost give you superhuman strength if you can control it for a good period of time. Maybe even frequently as you move from frustration and challenge to another. But how many of us are delivering ourselves to chronic, early onset mental and physical issues because we could never bring ourselves to accept how important we must be to ourselves? And of course, feeding anger into someone or something in the very end has diminishing returns. So a part of that overarching path is self-absolution from one's own torture and eventually forgiveness of the situation and or person or people that fueled the rage. Forgiveness is not a topic for today's episode and might well be fitting as a core topic for dozens of forthcoming episodes. And I pause with that there because I admit I have a lot of my own continuing work to do in that arena. So for another time then. Question: is there even a single benefit in any workplace to have repeated tests of our threshold for pain? Aside from how well or not that we do our jobs, and then potentially intimidate or even threaten by our performance, our colleagues, or those that serve as our superiors. What is it about these environments, academic and every other type of hierarchy, that lends to an environment that degrades our wellness? Think about this for a second. This doesn't make any sense, right? But more importantly, does a single person deserve to not feel and be well? And how is the concept of feeling better means doing better so deprioritized today, especially today? We mock our own humanity, and the slang tossed around is so cheap and pathetic. It is clear as a bell that the sources of certain messages are coming from such places of pain, such destruction, folks that have no willingness to, nor maybe any real idea how, to help themselves out of their world of shit. And now to begin an anecdote of the struggle for wellness. At a time when I should have been feeling where I was near the top of the world. But only a fool would believe that starting something new, no matter how exciting, wouldn't eventually reveal the still bleeding wounds that had been ignored for so long during the fight and the drive to achieve and make it to that next hallowed step. I left my postdoctoral position and moved back to the Midwest to take on a new job as an assistant professor at a large Research One university. It was the beginning of January 2007. I had a personal relationship, a long-term engagement, and the year before, with someone that had no interest in moving on to the place where I was taking up this position. And no, the engagement did not end because of that explicitly, but as I thought maybe, just maybe, there was the possibility of rekindling our relationship, it was made absolutely clear by my now ex-fiancée that she had zero interest in living in that town. And it was fitting that nearly a year before that, she'd broken up with me merely days before my interview at this university, which ironically landed on Valentine's Day 2006. I share this because of the level of compartmentalization that we, each of us, often have no choice to put ourselves through to quote-unquote succeed, maybe even achieve your dream. And as you rise to greet the hill up ahead of you, it becomes too simple to file more and more trauma away, buried deep within yourself. And one of the temporary non-drug painkillers is that hunger for the goal and the belief that eventually winning will make everything better. I fought through that confusion and pain. To be honest, I was completely numb, being so focused on my goal of getting a faculty job. And on the day of my interview and departmental presentation to faculty, staff, and students, I really felt as if I had nothing more I could lose. And I hoped, I prayed, I could set myself apart and just be unique and, dare I say, likable, human enough to be given the opportunity. After being introduced by my faculty host, I looked at the audience, hundreds of people large, and said with a smile on my face in that auditorium, something to the effect of, "It is such an honor to be here with you. And though I admit I don't know most of you, and I'm just starting to get to know some of you. On this Valentine's Day, I don't want to be too forward, but I just want to say I love you all," with the biggest smile I could muster and half chuckle. My comment was well received on the surface with a laugh from the audience, but part of me wonders today who in that audience appreciated it and who didn't. Nevertheless, I managed to get the job, and so began the extreme roller coaster of my young faculty career. But I have to also admit, I was so damaged then, already, from the very moment of that presentation. And though less after so much time and support from family, friends, and loved ones, and a lot of introspection, I admit I am still damaged, and I'm going through a constant progression of healing and years later, better identifying the importance of my own wellness. And like all of us, every one of us, it must be a never ending progression. I owe such gratitude to a former colleague, Melanie, and she would laugh at me, saying she did nothing. Minnesota born and tough as nails in the winters you get up there. Spent some time in the state of Texas after she got her PhD, and before she became a new assistant professor. She's been around the block, and if ever there were a pragmatist, it was her. I had shown up on campus that January 2007, managed to get into a different relationship before I left the West Coast, another anesthetic of denial for myself, for my own trauma, and my laboratory space wasn't ready. So I was plopped into an office and lab space that in no way would ever meet my functional purposes. But for now, we'll set that aside. I'll never forget coming back from a trip to California in late February 2007. There was a blizzard and I chose to fly into a different destination city and rent a car and drive a few hundred miles during that blizzard to get back to campus so I could be present for an appointment with a seminar speaker. To many of you familiar with this, you might find how utterly insane that sounds. Coming back from vacation, driving alone through a blizzard just so I could keep my appointment for a seminar speaker. But yes, I was that serious about my job, and I guess no less and completely upside down for my priorities. A couple of months passed, and it was becoming clearer and clearer that this new relationship was not going to be logistically possible for either of us. Just the kind of thing where the frustrations of distance arose, and indeed, the pains of logistics to where I was now living made matters overly complicated, and we were at the different points of our careers and lives. And it was here where I was completely and utterly alone. There was one faculty member at this institution that I had a past connection with, but they had their own family, their own life. I was only a handful of hours' drive from where I grew up, but was completely isolated. And I'll reiterate again, in case it wasn't clear, a Midwest campus town, and now a single guy in his mid-30s. But it wasn't just that. It was the enormity of mountain lying before me and expectations of myself and whatever was the expectations of others, whether they were to end up being very clear or otherwise. It became so bad emotionally, psychologically, the isolation and loneliness I felt, so severe. I went across the street to a church a block from my apartment, just so I'd feel some sense of community. And it was a place to see and hear about other people's pain during the services and their struggles. I wept during more than one church service that I attended. It was the only place I felt some normalcy, and to feel some kinship and struggles that were often very much out in the open. And no, this was not what one would deem a traditional church, but one that had tenets of being much more ecumenical. Even as I tried to get my planning and efforts together, student recruiting started, the summer hit, and working to show up and keep my head up. It was a struggle in darkness every single day. Of the handful of other new faculty that had joined the department I was the only one that joined a particular section of that department. Melanie was in a separate contingent. I can't remember the exact date when I did this. We had meetups before to talk about departmental matters, to have some lunches, and she was still in the throes of setting up her own research operation. But I walked into her office, looked at her, and said bluntly, "I'm so alone," and burst into tears. As I described earlier, Melanie was as a pragmatist of a human being as I've ever met. And in my years of knowing her as a colleague and confidant, maybe there was one time I recall her being emotional, driven so strongly by anger at one of an uncountable number of ridiculous and untenable situations that were common during our time. She just looked at me simply without pause and said, "I've got space for two here. Just come on in and use this other desk." And I did. I did for several weeks after that. And this corresponded with me telling one of my faculty mentors that I was in no shape or condition yet to write a grant proposal she was expecting of me, even just a handful of months after showing up. And today, I'm not ashamed to admit it, to the point where I was being hounded so much about someone else's timeline. My mentor's arbitrary timeline for me, not with any of my own insights, perspectives, or planning, or mental wellness taken into consideration at all. It took me having a mental breakdown in front of that individual for them to finally start to understand they just need to leave me alone for a few months. To get my own soon-to-be starting teaching load prepped and ready to go, and my own mental wellness better in check, I knew my own schedule, and I knew what still was not ready that had been contractually obligated to me. And I knew finally that I desperately needed to do some healing, and to discover my passion and my purpose. Once the fall grew nearer, and I made plans to teach my large lecture course using some new tools and approaches, including podcasting in the classroom, my life started to come back together. Unfortunately, it took work, yet again, to light a fire under me. But I planned and took the risk that I could run a successful research program and teach like very few, if any, had ever taught a large lecture science course ever before. Finally, I was able to get back to my own without needing someone there with me, and I am forever indebted to Melanie for that simple but invaluable gesture. My office and lab space was finally ready for me to move in, though the university fell way short for more than a year after my arrival of it being fully operational. and I was able to make it through the fall of 2007 with some real success with my teaching and ramping up assembly of my research group. As it turned out, it took a lot of time and a deep reminder of purpose to pull myself out of such a deep hole that I was in. But other than cursory meetings, there was no one to check on me and my health and well-being. No one in charge of me stopped by to just offer a friendly hello, to simply see how I was. Melanie served a similar purpose as emotional backstop for me more than once, including a time a year-long relationship I fostered with a woman that already had a couple of children abruptly ended. This, in the context of my academic life, is a story for another time, another day. But it was Melanie that looked at me straight in the eye and said, matter-of-factly at that point, you need to join a gym and work this all out. How easy and horrible it is to give up everything, to feel like you can demonstrate sacrifice so much of yourself and a willingness to hold up the world, to show those in power and the power structure how committed you are. Yet again, Melanie was right. And that lesson I've never forgotten. Though I may have wavered in later times, today it is shameful what I did not do for myself and my own health. And all I can do is continue to make up for lost time and give back to myself first. I bet every one of you, if not most of you, would agree that sometimes to reach that golden ring, it means you have to be willing to do anything and to give up anything. I've lived it, and I bet many of you have as well. And for those of us in positions at times where we literally are given no choice but to do so, so long as we all remember, we are worth more than that, period. For younger folks in the line, before you give every part of yourself away, especially your wellness, think long and hard about what it will cost you and where that specific path might lead, or not. I'm grateful for my partner today. She's shown me patience and support as I continue to move along my own journey for wellness. And I am grateful for every iota of kindness and understanding shown to me over what is now decades of a career where all I wanted to do was serve people in the best ways I knew how and can in science, education, communication, and more. For any of you listening that were a part of my life that showed me this support, even in the smallest of ways, I cannot express how much gratitude I have for you. And I'm thankful to still be standing stronger and more enlightened than I was before on the importance of my own wellness while carrying on the path before me. And on that note, as we wrap up today's episode and sharing my sentiments on wellness with only a brief bit of personal backstory, I know some of you listening are undergoing the scourge and pain of a misdirected view on the needs and the roles of the federal workforce of the United States. The workforce that supports and protects us all, each and every citizen, and our national security. The news is saturated every hour with stories of folks that committed so much for this opportunity to serve, and now, with some of you having uprooted your lives, changing your careers, and made the investment, often costly choices, to serve in so many realms in the interest and protection of the American people, you find yourselves as outcasts, judged not for who you are or what you do, but for being a part of something bigger, serving a grander purpose that those now at the top are unfathomably unable to comprehend. Your service permeates every single aspect of our lives, today and for decades in the future. Your service is a part of the undeniable glue that holds us together as the United States of America. For those rejected, denied, and castigated, never forget your worth. Never let anyone deny your value. And when those moments come where you have no energy left to hold yourself up, know that the appreciation and support that millions of people in the United States and the entire world harbor for you still burn bright. Give yourself the time, bandwidth, and patience to adjust and revector. For anyone that knows a federal employee that was injudiciously, unceremoniously removed from their position, please lend them whatever support you can. And if you know a federal employee that is continuing to serve their mission, please show your support and gratitude. We would not be the nation we are today without the honored service of all of these people. And with that, thank you so much for joining me today. And I hope you look forward to our next episode that will be released in a week's time. And no matter on which platform you heard today's episode, if you enjoyed it and want to hear more, please subscribe, follow, like, and share. And set your notifications to let you know that next fresh episode is ready for you to dig in. All of you, keep building up your courage, hang in there, and keep your head up. We'll talk to you again soon. Continuing 30 years of experience with stories in and beyond the academic realm, Antithesis is a podcast that will take these perspectives and philosophies and pull them, along with you, the student, the researcher, the innovator, the educator, into the sunlight. Join us for some firsthand experiences, insights from inside and outside academia, and perspectives that are aimed at redefining the conventions of academia and your training with the aim of helping you reorient your compass and strengthen you on your journey forward, or to recover and grow from those times past. We'd love to have you follow us and tune in weekly. If you have a topic you'd like discussed or a challenge you are facing you want to share, email us at allsystemsgo@gmail.com. That is ALLSYST3MSGO@gmail.com.